Ane. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. Russian Buk-M2E air defense fails in Venezuela. What's left? I'm Alex.
And I'm Mario.
Welcome to the Deep Dive from Defense Report, where we give you a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense, military tech, and strategic developments.
And today we are really going deep on something that just sent shockwaves through the entire defense community.
We're talking about Operation Absolute Resolve, the U.S. military strike on January 3rd, 2026, that ended with the stunning capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife.
It was an incredible military achievement, no doubt. But the real story here, the one that has planners in Moscow and frankly across NATO holding emergency meetings, is this. The U.S. suffered 0 losses.
0. Despite the fact that Venezuela has some of Russia's most vaunted air defense exports, we're talking the S-300VM, the Buk-M2E systems that were supposed to be formidable.
They were supposed to be an Iron Dome of sorts over Caracas, but they just folded instantly. So the mission for us today is to figure out what happened. Why did these high-tech Russian systems fail so completely?
And crucially, what does this failure mean for European defense, especially with everyone watching Russia's performance in Ukraine so closely?
Exactly. So we're going to unpack the tactical details of the strike itself, analyze this really systemic collapse of the Russian defense systems, and then chart the geopolitical fallout. Because this has created something people are calling the Donroe Doctrine, and it's changing the game.
All right, let's start with the anatomy of the strike, Operation Absolute Resolve. To set the scene a bit, Maduro's regime was already on the ropes.
Oh, completely. Economic collapse, disputed elections back in 2024, years of U.S. sanctions, and a steady U.S. military buildup in the region. Remember, Operation Southern Spear.
Right, the seizure of oil tankers, the constant pressure, and of course, Maduro and his wife were both under indictment in the U.S. for narco-terrorism.
So the stage was set. The raid itself happened around 2 a.m. local time. It was clinical, it was fast.
And the force they used, I mean, it reads like a who's who of the U.S. military's best assets. 150 aircraft.
F-22 Raptors, F-35s to kick the door in, B-1B Lancers for standoff strikes.
And then the actual snatch and grab team, Delta Force, and the FBI's hostage rescue team, delivered by Apache gunships and MH-60M DAP helicopters.
It's an overwhelming amount of power. But the key here, and all the analysts agree on this, is that this wasn't shock and awe.
No, not at all. It was a surgical strike. Laser focus.
The goal was to get Maduro and get out.
Yeah.
They only neutralized the threats that were directly in the way of the apprehension team. The U.S. objectives were, incredibly narrow.
And you can see that in the target list. Fort Tuna, the military complex where they thought Maduro was hiding in a bunker.
Yes, and the satellite imagery shows the damage there was very specific. They hit a vehicle maintenance facility and the emergency power generation for the complex.
So not just random bombing. They hit the maintenance depot to stop any armored units from rolling out to counterattack the Special Forces team.
Precisely. They were likely targeting the 312th Armored Cavalry Battalion's depot. You stop a counterattack before it can even start. And taking out the backup power. That cripples command and control in the bunker right when they need it most.
Okay, let's talk about the invisible side of this. The electronic warfare. The EW reports say it was decisive.
Oh, it was everything. Spectrum dominance is the term you're hearing. It's the difference between walking into a dark room and walking into a dark room when the other guy is wearing night vision goggles.
So you're not just jamming their radar, you're doing more than that.
Much more. For a system like the S-300, it needs to track a target, illuminate it, guide a missile. The U.S. platforms, especially the F-35 and its support aircraft, just flooded the entire area with noise and false information. They essentially made the sky go black for the Venezuelan sensors.
So the radar operators are seeing nothing. Or they're seeing 1,000 false targets.
Both.
Yeah.
They can't get a lock. They can't achieve what's called a weapons quality track. Their screens are either useless static or just full of ghosts.
And we heard whispers that this might have been the first time the U.S. used one-way attack drones in an operation like this.
It's possible. They could have been used as decoys to make the most important radars switch on, revealing their position just before they were hit. The EW paved the way for the physical destruction.
And that destruction, the list of confirmed kills, is just devastating for Russia's sales pitch.
It is. I mean, look at the list. At La Carlotta Air Base and Higorod Airport, 3 Buk-M2E launcher vehicles. But more importantly,
The radars.
3 Buk-M2E radar units destroyed. The launchers are useless without the radar. That's the eyes and the brain of the battery. Take that out, the rest is just scrap metal.
They also got 3 S-300 launchers and an S-300 radar unit. And even some Chinese systems?
Yes, 4 Chinese FK-3 missile launchers. These are pitched as a direct competitor to the U.S. Patriot system, and they failed just as badly. This is a disaster for both Moscow and Beijing's export portfolios.
Which leads us to the big question, especially for our listeners who are tracking the war in Ukraine. These Russian systems, the S-300VM, the Buk, the Pantsir, they did nothing. Zero damage to U.S. aircraft.
One U.S. helicopter took some small arms fire from the ground, but it remained operational. That's it.
Now, a skeptic would say, well, of course they failed. They were facing F-22s and F-35s. Is it really about the Russian hardware or just about being totally overwhelmed?
That's a fair question, but the failure was so complete, so total, that analysts believe it points to something systemic. The consensus growing is that a well-planned, multi-domain Western operation can just bypass these systems entirely.
So what's the cause? Is it just that the Venezuelan operators were poorly trained?
That's almost certainly part of it. Poor training, bad maintenance, low readiness. An air defense network is a team sport, and their team wasn't ready. But there's a second, more worrying possibility for anyone who has bought Russian gear.
Which is?
Are the export models, the E versions, deliberately downgraded. We've seen them perform inconsistently in Syria, in Ukraine, but this was a clean sweep. It suggests there might be fundamental limitations built into the systems they sell abroad.
Which has to be a huge sigh of relief for NATO air forces. It reinforces that idea that these systems, at least when operated by other countries, just can't handle a top-tier attack.
It's a catastrophic blow to Moscow's credibility, and it comes at the worst possible time for them, with all their resources tied up in the 4th year of the war in Ukraine. They can't afford this kind of reputational damage.
So let's shift to the political fallout. Maduro is gone. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is sworn in as acting president, and she is in an impossible position.
Absolutely impossible. On one hand, she's got Washington laying down non-negotiable demands. On the other, she has to keep the hardline Chavistas, guys like Diosdado Cabello, on her side. So she calls the capture a kidnapping for the domestic audience.
And what are those U.S. demands?
It's a long list. Total access for U.S. oil companies, for one, and an immediate end to all intelligence and security cooperation with Russia, China, Iran, and Cuba.
The China connection is huge, right? Venezuela owes Beijing something like $20 billion.
$20 billion, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's paid back with oil. China takes about half of Venezuela's oil exports just to service that debt.
And it's not just money. Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE basically run their critical infrastructure.
They control the fiber optic network, the national surveillance system. You can't just rip that out overnight. It would mean rebuilding the country's entire digital backbone from scratch. That's a massive point of leverage for Beijing.
And what about Russia? They're more than just a political ally there.
They're an operational lifeline. Russia supplies Venezuela with the diluents and naphtha they need to process their heavy crude oil. Without it, they can't export their main product.
And the U.S. is targeting that directly.
Immediately. The White House announced plans to send U.S.-produced diluent to Venezuela. It's a strategic move to push Russia completely out of that market and cut another one of Moscow's economic lifelines.
We should also mention the Cuban role. Maduro's personal security detail was Cuban, and reports say 32 of them were killed in the raid.
A stunningly high number. It just shows the speed and lethality of the U.S. strike force. And now, Secretary of State Rubio has put Havana on notice, cooperate, or the Venezuelan oil you depend on gets cut off.
All of this has led to the coining of a new term, the Don Roe Doctrine. What exactly is that?
It's being framed as the Trump corollary to the old Monroe Doctrine. Basically, it's an assertion of absolute U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere, using force whenever it's deemed necessary, regardless of international law.
And they're not being subtle about it. There were quotes from senior officials saying things like, "We don't need international law, and the world is governed by strength."
Which is why, of course, legal experts around the world immediately condemned the raid as a severe breach of the UN Charter. You just can't go into another country and grab its head of state.
And this is where it gets incredibly awkward for European allies.
It's a huge dilemma. How can European leaders build a global coalition against Russia's violation of sovereignty in Ukraine when their main ally is doing something so similar on another continent? It's the definition of a double standard.
And it's not just a theoretical problem. The administration explicitly linked this action to its threats to coercively acquire Greenland from Denmark.
A NATO ally. They're threatening a NATO ally with military force as an option right after this operation. It's sending waves of anxiety through Brussels.
So Europe is stuck. They can't really condemn the U.S. because they need American support against Russia in Ukraine.
They have to bite their tongues. They're forced to prioritize the alliance over the principles of international law, even though Washington's actions are undermining the very arguments they're trying to make against Putin.
How did Kiev react to all this?
It was very nuanced, as you can imagine. On one hand, you saw some schadenfreude, you know, happiness at seeing a Putin client taken down, and hope for lower oil prices.
And on the other hand,
On the other, some recognize the danger of legitimizing these kinds of decapitation operations because they remember very well that President Zelensky was the target of one himself back in 2022.
So to wrap this up, what are the big takeaways from this deep dive?
I think there are two. First, on a military level, Operation Absolute Resolve was a terrifying display of what a fully integrated, multi-domain Western force can do. And it exposed a potentially fatal weakness in Russia's high-end air defense exports. That has huge implications for the military balance everywhere.
And the second takeaway is geopolitical. The U.S. has signaled a hard pivot to reasserting dominance in its own hemisphere, and it's willing to break with international norms to do it. This puts allies in a tough spot and fundamentally changes the game for Russia and China in Latin America.
And here's the final provocative thought to leave you with. Capturing Maduro solved an immediate problem for the U.S., but by trashing international law and even threatening an ally like Denmark, has Washington set a precedent that will actually help its rivals in the long run. By normalizing the idea of spheres of influence enforced by might, has the U.S. just given Russia the justification it's always wanted for its actions on Europe's border?
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.